Mel Brooks spent more than 6 decades crafting some of the funniest, most iconic comedies ever made. Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, The Producers, Spaceballs. Along the way, he worked with hundreds of actors. Most he adored. But a few he never wanted to share a set with them again. Brooks wasn't the type to scream or throw tantrums. He had a quieter way of handling conflict. He remembered every clash, every oversized ego, every moment someone believed they were bigger than the film itself. And once you broke Mel's trust, you were gone. For good. In this video, we're diving into the 6 actors Mel Brooks openly disliked working with, the feuds, the blow-ups, and the names he quietly crossed off his casting lists forever. And trust me, when you hear number 3, it's going to leave you stunned. Gene Wilder. Gene Wilder. Not every betrayal comes crashing down with slammed doors or angry words. Some slip in quietly, a shrug, a no, and a silence that lingers for years. For Mel Brooks, that silence came from Gene Wilder, the one man he never imagined losing. Wilder wasn't just another actor in Brooks's films. He was his mirror, his rhythm, his perfect comedic twin. Together, they set Hollywood on fire with The Producers, redefined satire with Blazing Saddles, and carved a gothic masterpiece with Young Frankenstein. They didn't just make movies, they rewrote comedy history. But when the final shot of Young Frankenstein faded, so did the harmony. Wilder had poured his heart into the script, shaping its heartbeat line by line. Brooks fought the studio to keep it in black and white, directing with an obsession that bordered on madness. Together, they pulled off the impossible. It should have marked the beginning of their greatest chapter. Instead, it became the end. The fracture came with another script, Wilder's own. The adventure of Sherlock Holmes's smarter brother. He had written it. He wanted to star in it. He wanted to direct it. And more than anything, he wanted Brooks to believe in him, the way he had always believed in Brooks. But Brooks refused. Gene wasn't ready to direct, he later admitted. To Wilder, it wasn't caution, it was betrayal. I thought Mel was my partner, he confided. Partners don't walk away when it matters most. So Wilder forged ahead without him. He hired Marty Feldman, cast Madeline Kahn, and rebuilt the same family that had made Young Frankenstein magic, just without Mel. The film flickered with charm, but the spark was dimmer. The timing was off. And Brooks, watching from the sidelines, compared it to watching a brother pack his bags and leave home. Only this time, he took your best joke with him. What followed wasn't tabloid fury or a screaming feud. It was worse, silence. 4 years, the men who once finished each other's sentences stopped speaking. Friends whispered, Hollywood noticed, but neither man opened the wound in public. They carried it quietly, the way comedians often hide their deepest sorrows, behind the laughter. Time, as it does, dulled the sharp edges. A chance encounter years later led to a handshake, a few old jokes, and eventually something resembling friendship again. But something had cracked that never healed. They never worked together again, not because of rage, but because trust, once broken, rarely returns. Brooks later admitted, Gene was the only actor I ever trusted with my unfinished thoughts. I could hand him half a scene, and he'd finish it as if he'd already seen the ending. After Smarter Brother, I couldn't do that anymore. Wilder, for his part, never spoke ill of Brooks. In interviews, he kept the warmth alive, calling him the funniest man I've ever known, the brother I got to choose. But even in his affection, you could hear the echo of what had been lost. When Gene Wilder passed in 2016, Brooks's grief was raw and undeniable. On stage, he broke down, I can't get used to the fact that he's not with us anymore. He filled my heart with such joy. Whatever distance had lingered, it was swept away by finality. In the end, their story wasn't about hatred, but about trust, built, broken, and mourned. To the world, they were the perfect duo. Behind the curtain, they were 2 men who loved each other enough to wound each other deeply. And for Mel Brooks, that scar never faded. Because sometimes, the one who makes you laugh the hardest is also the one who can break your heart the most. Frank Langella. Frank Langella. Some actors don't just lose roles, they lose entire directors. That's exactly what happened when Langella collided with Mel Brooks. On paper, Langella was a dream choice. He had already hypnotized Broadway as Dracula, tall, magnetic, and cloaked in Shakespearean gravitas. To the industry, he was Dracula. And that, ironically, was the problem. Brooks wasn't making gothic tragedy. He wasn't interested in candlelit soliloquies or smoldering stares. He was making Dracula, Dead and Loving It, a movie where the Count should slip on a candelabra immediately after a grand monologue. From the very first rehearsal, the tension was unmistakable. Brooks ran his sets like a circus, loud, improvisational, fueled by chaos that somehow landed with surgical precision. Langella, in contrast, entered like he was reprising Hamlet. Every line came with grave solemnity. Jokes were delivered as if they were scripture. He wasn't playing Dracula, Brooks later joked to a friend. He was auditioning for sainthood. Brooks tried everything: notes, nudges, gentle jokes, but nothing broke the marble statue. Langella listened politely, then returned to his funeral-paced delivery. The cast, veterans of Brooks's slapstick universe, froze. Crew members whispered, "Are we making a comedy or an opera?" Momentum collapsed under the weight of Langella's pauses. The breaking point came during a test read. Brooks handed him a fresh gag, a dramatic build-up ending in a pratfall. Langella blinked, stone-faced, and asked, "Do you want me to mock the text?" Brooks stared at him, then snapped, "No. I want you to survive it." That was the end. Within a week, Langella was quietly replaced. No tantrums, no screaming match, just a clean break. Enter Leslie Nielsen. To Brooks, Nielsen was the perfect foil, a man who could play deathly serious and, in doing so, make everything around him funnier. The official excuse was creative differences, but insiders knew the truth. Brooks wasn't about to wrestle a Shakespearean monument into slapstick. Langella never publicly trashed Brooks, but privately dismissed the whole ordeal as a circus I had no interest in joining. Brooks, for his part, never mentioned Langella when discussing the film. Instead, when asked about Dracula, Dead and Loving It, he had only one word for Nielsen: perfect. Their paths never crossed again. No reconciliation, no late-life reunion, no Hollywood nostalgia moment. Brooks never badmouthed Langella, but his silence said it all. In his world, actors either danced with the chaos or got swallowed by it. Langella walked in wearing a crown. But Brooks wasn't making royalty. He was making madness. And in his universe, you had to love the fall. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase. Mel Brooks always believed comedy was a dance, a rhythm, a give and take, partners trusting each other not to miss the beat. One sets up, the other lands the punchline, then you switch, then you share. That rhythm made his films sing. But with Chevy Chase, Brooks felt the music stop. Studios in the 80s and early 90s kept pushing Chase his way. He was hot. Saturday Night Live, Fletch, Vacation. He had the smirk, the box office pull, the kind of name you could plaster on a poster and guarantee a return. On paper, he was perfect for Brooks's brand of parody. But Brooks shut it down, every single time. Why? Because Chase broke what Brooks considered comedy's first commandment: generosity. "He's not acting," Brooks once told a casting director. "He's waiting for everyone else to stop talking so he can prove he's the smartest in the room." In Brooks's eyes, Chase was a sniper. Deadly funny, yes, but always firing from a distance. He didn't collaborate, he competed. The closest they ever came was Spaceballs. Chase's name was floated for Dark Helmet. He had the voice, the dry delivery. But Brooks barely blinked. He wanted Rick Moranis. "Rick knows when to step back," Brooks explained. "Chevy only knows how to interrupt." For Brooks, it was never about star power, it was about chemistry. And chemistry, he believed, couldn't survive ego. Privately, he described Chase as someone who crashed comedy instead of dancing with it. The perpetual smirk, the irony that undercut sincerity, those were red flags. In Brooks's world, no matter how absurd the gag, you had to commit fully. You had to believe it. Chevy, in his view, never believed. They met once, brief, stiff, forgettable. At the end of it, Brooks reportedly smiled and said, "Maybe in another universe." Chase didn't argue. He didn't push. He just walked away. That universe never came. Chase, for his part, never launched a counterattack. But in later interviews, when asked about directors he never worked with, he dropped a telling remark: Some guys want you to play by their rules. I make my own. Friends say it wasn't bitterness. It was pride. To Chase, Brooks was a control freak. To Brooks, Chase was chaos disguised as confidence. The feud never made headlines because it didn't need to. Brooks didn't blacklist him. He simply left him out. Not out of spite, but out of instinct. In Mel Brooks's universe, comedy was sacred. Timing mattered more than stardom. Trust mattered most of all. And so, there's no reconciliation story, no late-in-life handshake, just two men who circled the same orbit but never touched. Brooks still preaches ensemble and trust. Chase still carries the legend, and the burden, of being brilliant but difficult. Maybe that's the quiet ending. Mel Brooks didn't hate Chevy Chase enough to fight him. He just didn't trust him enough to ever let him in. Jerry Lewis. Mel Brooks respected brilliance. He revered craft. But what he couldn't abide, what he flat-out refused to tolerate, was arrogance dressed up as comedy. And to Brooks, that's exactly what Jerry Lewis embodied. For years, the two names were spoken side by side. Both comedy architects, both writer-director stars, both visionaries who reshaped the absurd. On paper, they looked like kindred spirits. Studios even dreamed of pairing them, picturing a once-in-a-lifetime comedic supernova. But Brooks never bit. Behind closed doors, he described Lewis as brilliant and exhausting. He admired the nutty professor, but not the man who created him. The turning point came in the mid-1980s. Brooks was developing Life Inc., a satire about a billionaire forced to survive on the streets. The studio pitched Lewis for a supporting role, promising it would bring prestige. Brooks didn't hesitate. "I don't need someone who thinks he's funnier than the film," he snapped. To him, Lewis wasn't a partner. He was a hijacker. Stories of Lewis rewriting scripts on the spot, bulldozing directors, and hogging every ounce of oxygen on set only confirmed Brooks's instincts. The two finally met once, at a dinner set up by a mutual friend. Brooks walked in curious. Lewis arrived late. For 15 straight minutes, Lewis launched into a monologue about the future of American comedy, never once asking Brooks a single question. Brooks listened, stone-faced, then excused himself before dessert. Later, he summed it up in one brutal line: he wanted applause. That was it. No second chances, no collaborations, no quiet reconciliation. Asked years later why he never cast Lewis, Brooks didn't mince words. "If someone thinks they're the center of the universe, they can't function in mine. I already have a son." Lewis, for his part, rarely mentioned Brooks. When pressed once about his films, he shrugged. "Different schools. He does his thing. I do mine." But those who knew him swore the rejection stung, that Lewis took it personally, even if he wouldn't admit it. Their non-feud became its own legend. Not a war of words, but a silence that spoke volumes. To Brooks, Jerry Lewis was a nuclear event waiting to happen, brilliant on screen, but too volatile off it. And so, they never shared a stage, a panel, or even another meal. When Lewis died in 2017, Brooks offered only a brief nod of respect. Jerry was a force. No warmth. No wistful what could have been. Just acknowledgement of a talent he admired from afar, but never trusted. Because in Mel Brooks's world, comedy wasn't about outshining the room. It was about rhythm, ensemble, and balance. And Jerry Lewis never played by those rules. Which meant, for Brooks, there was never going to be a place for him. Harvey Korman. Harvey Korman. On screen, he was a dream, Mel Brooks's secret weapon. The man who could stretch a pause into pure comedy gold, twist his face into absurdity, and still keep a scene tethered to something real. Blazing Saddles. High Anxiety. History of the World, Part 1. Again and again, Korman delivered some of the sharpest, most unforgettable laughs in Brooks's entire career. But behind the camera, the chemistry was far less smooth. Korman came out of the Carol Burnett Show, where he was king of sketch comedy. On Burnett's stage, scripts were flexible, improvisation was celebrated, and the entire room often bent to his rhythm. Brooks's sets were different. Brooks wasn't conducting a sketch show, he was conducting a symphony. Every glance, every line, every beat had its place. Break the rhythm, and the whole scene risked collapse. That clash came to a head during High Anxiety. Korman had landed the plum role of Dr. Montague, the sinister head of the Psychoneurotic Institute for the very, very nervous. But instead of sticking to the script, Korman tried to reinvent it, adding quirks, rewriting dialogue, spinning whole new routines around the character. Brooks cut him off cold. "We already wrote the funny part. We just need you to do it." Korman bristled. Day after day, he pushed back, challenging blocking, second-guessing lines, nudging for tweaks Brooks never wanted. Crew members later described the atmosphere as passive warfare. No screaming matches, no thrown scripts, just a constant tug of war. Brooks, usually quick to riff with actors, started cutting conversations short. "Harvey wants to be the director," he told one producer. "I already have that job." By the final weeks of filming, they were barely speaking. Notes were passed through assistants. Korman ate lunch alone. The spark that had made Blazing Saddles explode with energy now felt strained, mechanical. And while Korman's performance still landed, he was too good to let the tension show. Brooks never forgot how hard it had been to get there. After high anxiety, Korman's name quietly disappeared from Brooks's casting lists. Not out of spite, but out of sheer fatigue. "Some actors bring joy," Brooks admitted later in private. "Harvey brought brilliance, but it always came with resistance." There was no Hollywood feud, no tabloid blow-up. Korman still called Brooks a genius in interviews, and Brooks continued to credit Korman with elevating his films. But the collaboration was finished. The rhythm had been broken, and Brooks built his universe on rhythm. In the end, it wasn't hatred. It was exhaustion. Brooks could live with chaos, eccentricity, even diva behavior, so long as it served the joke. But when collaboration turned into competition, comedy stopped being fun. And for Mel Brooks, laughter was never supposed to feel like war. Richard Pryor. Mel Brooks built his empire on timing. Every pause, every punchline, every beat was deliberate. To him, comedy wasn't chaos. It was music. And when he discovered Richard Pryor, he thought he'd found a brand new instrument. Wild, untamed, capable of changing the sound of comedy forever. Pryor wasn't just another funny man. He was volcanic, raw, unfiltered, electric. Brooks felt it the very first time they sat down together, hammering out the script for what would become Blazing Saddles. Pryor wasn't hired as an actor. He was brought in as a co-writer. But his fingerprints are everywhere. The danger, the edge, the bite that turned the movie into one of the most subversive comedies Hollywood had ever seen. Brooks wanted him on screen too. He envisioned Pryor as Sheriff Bart, the black lawman riding into a racist town with wit sharp enough to cut steel. It was bold. It was risky. It was perfect. But the studio balked. They didn't trust him. Too many rumors of drugs, too much volatility, too much fire. Brooks fought for him. He pushed. But in the end, Cleveland Little wore the badge. Officially, the excuse was studio hesitation. But whispers lingered. Some said Brooks himself got cold feet, that Pryor's star burned so hot, so unpredictably, that even Brooks feared losing control of his own film. As one associate recalled, Brooks once admitted, "Richard's not a co-star. He's a supernova. He could suck all the light out of the room." For Pryor, it was betrayal. He'd written the most dangerous jokes, the ones no one else dared touch, and now someone else was delivering them. "He wanted me to do the dirty work," Pryor reportedly said, "but not get the laugh." Brooks tried to smooth it over. Publicly, he called Pryor the funniest man who ever lived. Privately, he confessed frustration. Pryor's brilliance was undeniable, but so was the chaos that came with it. "I couldn't build a set around him," Brooks once sighed. "I need rhythm." Richard brought fire. Fire burns the set down. Years later, Pryor himself shrugged it off with that trademark smirk. "They didn't want me in it. They got scared. Mel got scared. Too much Richard, not enough Mel. Not rage. Just resignation." They never traded barbs in the press. They even spoke kindly of each other. But the trust was gone. They never worked together again. And Hollywood lost what could have been one of the greatest actor-director pairings in history. To this day, Brooks still calls Blazing Saddles his proudest achievement. Yet when Richard Pryor's name comes up, he whispers just one word: genius. For Brooks, it's admiration. For Pryor, it was a wound. Because sometimes the fiercest feuds in Hollywood aren't loud. They're quiet. Just two men who recognized each other's brilliance and couldn't find a way to share it. So what do you think? Was Richard Pryor the problem, or was Mel Brooks too protective of his own vision? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more Untold Hollywood stories.